Welcome, everybody. It's a huge pleasure and honor to welcome Leon Bosch to RCS. He's an extraordinary musician, and I'm going to embarrass him a little bit by just saying what a very, very fine colleague he is. And really, he's one of the leading double bass players of his generation. He was principal bass of the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields for many, many years. If you're joining us, and I hope you are, from the department, the DDPF side of the RCS, and you're not a musician, you'll have heard him playing on The English Patient, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, all of those. And he's just, while we were warming up there, just told me that he played on over 7,500 pop tracks and films. So even if you're not aware of his name as a musician yet, you've probably heard him play at some point. So Leon has really kindly agreed to come and talk to us a little bit about his experiences growing up under apartheid in South Africa, and also on being a musician coming to the UK. And it's particularly lovely that we're welcoming Leon to Glasgow, because Glasgow City was one of the first cities to bestow the freedom of the city on Nelson Mandela, in recognition of that as part of the struggle against apartheid. That was in 1981, while Mandela was still in Robben Island. And then 5 years later, Leon, I don't know if you know this, but Glasgow City renamed one of the places in the middle of Glasgow Nelson Mandela Place.
Yes.
And it was the address of the South African consulate. Which meant that the South African consulate had to put this on their letterhead, Nelson Mandela Place. A small gesture perhaps, but one that brought Mandela to Glasgow in 1993 to say thank you. So I'm gonna, after that very brief introduction, I'm now gonna hand over to Simone Seals, who's going to host our conversation with Leon Bosch. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Welcome, Leon. Hi, everyone. Good to see your names in little boxes on the screen. I hope you enjoy the conversation tonight. I'm very much excited to talk to you and to ask you questions. And as we were just talking about flow states there, I'm definitely excited to talk maybe a bit more about that. But you said you had some stuff prepared, if you wanted to share that first.
Well, before I start with anything, I have an admission to make. That's amongst the very first things I did professionally as a musician in the United Kingdom was to play with the Scottish Ballet Company. We rehearsed for a week in Edinburgh, did a week's worth of performance there, and we went there. The next stop was Glasgow. So Glasgow is very much a part of my history. I know the place very well. I mean, I used to stay in a little hotel on Sauchiehall Street, and I'm sure that everybody knows that Sauchiehall Street is kind of central to the identity of Glasgow. But I mean, just to go straight into this question that I've come to talk to you all about. Most of you will know that I'm South African by birth, but that I'm known as the British double bass player because I've been for so long associated with the United Kingdom in the music business. Now, for those of you who don't know, I did a little talk for the Wigmore Hall called The Lockdown Conversation, and it's still online. So if you look up Wigmore Hall Lockdown Conversation, Leon Bosch, you'll find a lot about my life journey. But to put it in a nutshell, I was born in South Africa in 1961. So for those of you good at mathematics, it means I'm going to be 60 this year. And at the age of 15, I was a political prisoner because I opposed apartheid, and I believed that I wanted to devote my life to changing that. As a youngster, I was prepared to die for my principles, and I still am prepared to die for those principles. Justice is not something which is a luxury that we kind of dress ourselves up in once in a while. Either you believe in it or you don't. And as a youngster, I believed in it passionately, and I still do. So I won't tell you too much more about my history in South Africa, except to say that one of my first memories of life was in my bedroom at home, which I shared with my brother and sister, the dead of night, and men in dark suits coming into my room. And of course, as a youngster, I was terrified, or a kid, I mean, very, very young kid, I was terrified, must have pulled the blankets over my head and sort of hoped it. But I soon also discovered that I wasn't dreaming and that actually was real. It was the Special Branch Police raiding our house. And they were there to examine the bookshelves because every month there was a government gazette issued in which literature became illegal. And if any of those books on our shelves, they could arrest and detain my father. So those are my first memories of life. And growing up in the townships, and the townships are brutal places where, you could die very quickly. On the streets, I mean, crime is rife. But I don't want to talk to you about the details of apartheid and my growing up. I want to talk to you about my journey in music, because I think it has a relevance for all of you who at the conservatoire and also learning dance and theatre, everything else, because this is about our lives, how we've decided to devote ourselves to the future. So the question I want to answer is, how did I end up from the 15-year-old political prisoner and the kid that was born in the townships? How did I end up becoming principal double bass of the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, which is probably the world's most famous orchestra, and also professor at Conservatoire in London, and also having played on 7,500 pop tracks, and also having done 15 solo recordings, and also having my own publishing company, and also discovering music and doing all sorts of crazy things. Now, the truth of the matter is this, that I was not ever going to be a musician. It's purely by accident. I'm not exactly a reluctant musician as opposed to the accidental musician. And the reason I became a musician, not because I really wanted to, but because of the twist of fate. In South Africa at the time when I was growing up, if you wanted to go to university and you're the color that I am, you had to have a special permit to study. I know this sounds absolutely ridiculous and crazy today, but that was the truth of the matter. And I applied for a permit to study law because I wanted to be a lawyer. My mission in life was going to be to represent those who were not able to defend themselves. But I was refused a permit to study law. So as a joke, I applied for a permit for music. And I got one, and I thought, I better seize this opportunity. And then I ended up at the University of Cape Town. And I have to tell you that that was a pretty incredible part of my life. I spent 4 years at university. I was a cellist when I walked through the front door, a good one, but I was lucky to encounter some extraordinary people. My cello teacher, Edna Elphick, had been a student of Casals, and she kind of whetted my appetite for music. She gave me something to grab hold of, how to understand music. She got me to play the masterclass for Pierre Fournier. It was extraordinary. There was me, little 16-year-old young person, playing for one of the greatest cellists in the world. But she was also instrumental in suggesting that I start learning to play the double bass. And the person she introduced me to was Zoltán Kovács, Hungarian man, who was principal bass of the Cape Town Orchestra. And he is extraordinary, not just a great player, but also an extraordinarily good teacher, uncompromising Hungarian. When you learn something, the first stage was to memorize it. If you hadn't memorized it, you were thrown out. And that kind of discipline was very good for me early on. It taught me some fundamental things. But the teachers were one thing, the professors and the conductors were another thing. But the thing that what I learned most of all in my practice room in Cape Town, you see, there were only two bass players. One was the first study player, that was me. And then there was a second study bass player who never practiced. So I had the room to myself all the time. And I have to tell you that I spent up to 12 hours a day in that room. Most mornings I'd be in that room at 7 o'clock, and that was traveling 10 miles to get there. So I used to start the day very early. And I spent that all day there till 10 o'clock at night. I practiced, read. In those days I used to smoke, and I had my smokers. But what I want to tell you is that the most important thing that I discovered in that room was that talent does not exist. And I know you will all be horrified by that statement. But the proof has subsequently been written. And I don't know whether you're familiar with the book, The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle. Daniel Coyle demystifies the question of talent. And he does it brilliantly. But this is something I discovered myself very early in life. At the age of 16 or 17, I realized that talent didn't exist. Because when I walked through the front door of that music college in Cape Town, I could barely play. And by the time I left music college after 4 years, I was world class. And the thing that I realized was this, that what is impossible today becomes routine tomorrow if you work in a particular way. Daniel Coyle identifies the process of developing something to world class, and its ignition, the desire to want to do it. And then the question of deep practice. where you just play all the time because you're so obsessed with the thing, nothing is going to drag you away from doing that thing. But also there's a big problem, you see, you can't have just those two ingredients. You have to have the third one, because we know, everybody knows that there are young kids around the world who want to play football like Beckham. They kick the ball all day, but they never get better. And it's because the final ingredient is missing. And that ingredient is expert tuition. I was lucky. I had this great teacher, Zoltan Kovacs, who directed what I did in a very productive way. But also I knew when I practiced productively, because I would almost feel physically how something that I couldn't do would suddenly become embedded in my brain and would never disappear. And now we know that that process is called myelinization. Scientifically, it's been demystified. So, and the other thing that I also learned in Cape Town was this thing about how to practice effectively. I invented the Pomodoro method before it became called the Pomodoro method. I mean, you can look it up, and there's this whole idea has been scientifically defined as the Pomodoro method, where you practice in intense bursts of 20 minutes and you go away and you wonder about the problems, you think about something else, you disconnect and you go back and do 20 more minutes, and then at night your unconscious works on it, and then tomorrow you have a solution. I also discovered this thing about how to get better, how to improve things, how to do what you could never do before. And the truth of the matter is, it worked. I knew it worked, and everybody around me knew it worked, because suddenly, from being this hopeless little kid, this dark kid from the townships who would walk through the doors of the all-white institution in Cape Town, suddenly they began to call me the most talented person they'd ever encountered. They called me a virtuoso. Imagine being called a virtuoso at the age of 17, 18, playing an instrument in a way which defied imagination. The bass, until, you know, this was fairly early on in the development of the bass. Nowadays, I mean, there are many more people who can play Botticini and the complex virtuosic repertoire. But at the age of 16, I could play 10 pieces, 17 actually, 18, 10 pieces of Botticini. It's like playing 10 of the most difficult pieces of Paganini. But that was on the basis of good teaching and also dedication and also understanding how talent worked. And then the thing was that I decided to leave South Africa, that I had to escape in a way, because as somebody that had resisted the system and had been a prisoner, I wasn't allowed to travel internationally. But I got out. Anyway, I came to London. And I ended up at the Royal Open College of Music in Manchester. And it made the difference again for me in this journey was that I had the benefit of the protection, so to speak, and of a lot of very powerful and influential people. The head of the music college in Manchester at that time was Sir John Manuel, who had been also head of music at the BBC, a composer, and he ran the Chiltern Festival, and he decided I would come to Manchester. The head of strings, Eleanor Warren, again, gave me great opportunities. Tim Renish, Rodney Slatford, Sir Charles Groves, the great British conductor. And I was able then to hone the skills I developed already into the thing that was going to make me the musician that would earn a living for the rest of his life. And I have to tell you, though, that I never intended to have a professional career or to, you know, that wasn't my agenda. It just happened purely by accident. One thing led to another. There was never any plan to do any particular thing. It just so happens that in life, when you work particularly hard at something, it reveals something new, and then you become obsessed with the new thing. Then it leads you to something else, and every little thing leads you elsewhere. Success is not an event, it's a kind of lifelong process, a process of learning, the willingness to undertake the unimaginable. For me, it was never too much to drive 100 miles, 200 miles, 400 miles to play a concert. I became known in the business as the person who at short notice would take on anything. I left music college at the age of 20, whatever it was, 21, 22, as a postgrad. But already before I left college, I was freelancing with the BBC Philharmonic and other professional orchestras in the Northwest. And my career that has now spanned at least 4 decades took in so many things. I never lost sight of my passion for playing the bass as a solo instrument. So I played concertos, I played recitals, I played with string ensemble, I played chamber music, I played chamber orchestra, I did symphony orchestra, I played opera, I played contemporary music, I played the Baroque orchestras, commercial and films, pop sessions and film sessions. Also, I began to teach. I've been teaching since 1985. How many years is that? It's a long time. And I've learned the art of teaching. I've also coached many youth orchestras around the world. And I've given masterclasses absolutely everywhere. And the important thing to say about my teaching is that when I first began to teach, I realized that not everybody found what I was able to do on the instrument as easy to do. And I couldn't explain to them how to do it easily. And I realized I needed to find a foolproof method for allowing everybody to fly, because I knew they could. I just had to find the words, the means to do it. And I'm happy to be able to tell you that during all my years teaching, I've developed a system which is like an algorithm. And an algorithm is usually applied to technology, but in essence, it's a recipe. And this recipe of mine is absolutely foolproof. It was Dorothy DeLay that said her method was so good she could teach a chair to play. In a way, my system is as foolproof. But the important thing to know about my system is that it's not just going to require you to play an instrument. You're as likely to get a reading list from me as you are to get a repertoire list. And just to remind you that the first book on your reading list already is The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle. And for those artists or human beings that have not read it, you have to, because it will make you realize that nothing is impossible. In my experience, the people that are most obsessed with the idea of talent are artists themselves, but they never examine why they're successful as artists. I mean, the most successful artists I know have all had the best education that money can buy. Think about that for a second. Pinker Zuckerman, great violinist and a very good friend of mine, had the best teaching. Who taught him? Galamir, myself. He had the best teaching. Think of Isaac Perlman, the greatest teaching. Think of all the great Russian violinists, great teaching that they had. Think of anybody who's successful at anything. Think of athletes. The best athletes have the best coaches that money can buy. They also have the best psychologists, because success is not just about the mechanical things as an artist or an athlete or whatever one does, whether one dances or acts. It's also about your psychological condition. And we now understand that psychology is as much a part of what we do as artists. And I mean, I have to say that this is something that came to me very late, the importance of psychology. I just took it for granted. I now know through my teaching that the biggest vulnerabilities my students have are psychological ones. And once I can solve those for them, then they fly as artists. Most days of the week, I will receive emails from students I haven't seen for decades or years sometimes. They will write and say, "Dear Mr. Bosch, I'm writing to tell you that I've just landed a job in such and such an orchestra. I've had this success, and I date the change in my fortunes to that morning on the steps of the conservatory when you said this to me," or whatever. And that makes me realize how important it is, every word that I say to everybody, because it will resonate in their lives, reverberate in their lives forever. And the thing I want to tell every musician is that you're capable of anything, absolutely anything. It's just a question of breaking it down. You know, there's the word called chunking, where you take things apart, and you examine them, you see how they fit together, put it back together, and then you polish them. And polishing doesn't take a week, a month, 3 months, it takes a lifetime. I return to a repertoire that I learned as a youngster. There's a particular piece which I haven't played since 1983, or 82, actually earlier, 81, that I'm relearning now. So how long is that? 30 years I haven't played this, 40 years I haven't played this piece, because I'm going to record it. And I look at the solutions that I wrote into my music, and I think, well, actually, I know better now. So I'm improving on what I did when I was young. So the question of refinement is lifelong. But it's also interesting for me to see the process of how I've matured as an artist, what it was I was as a youngster. As a youngster, I had no fear. I would play anything. And of course, I didn't realize all the pitfalls, the dangers, and I didn't care. I just played. Now, of course, I understand the danger. I understand the pitfalls, but I have better solutions. Also, I have much more experience. I know exactly what it's going to feel like to be terrified, and I know how to deal with it. So it doesn't scare me to be terrified. I know that I have to be terrified, otherwise I will not turn out a performance. I'll just turn out a very well organized final rehearsal. You have to live with danger. My wife used to describe it for me when I once played through a little piece for her before we played a recital. I asked her, "Look, there's something wrong with this. Can you tell me what I'm doing wrong?" And she listened, she said, "Play it again." And at the end of it, she said something which struck me like a bolt of lightning. She said, you know, usually when you play that piece, it's almost like the devil's on your shoulder, but at the moment it's not there. And that made me realize something fundamental. We have to play with absolute abandon. And you cannot play with absolute abandon unless you consummately prepared. Now, I mean, I've been talking a lot about, you know, the things I did and, you know, all the films I've played in. I've played all the greatest pop artists. I mean, I forget most of the names, but Madonna, Robbie Williams, Joni Mitchell, the Jackson Brothers, Eric Clapton, what's the name of the Beatles guy who's still playing his guitar, you know, Paul McCartney, and films, you know, Harry Potter's, the Batman, James Bond, absolutely everything. Now, the question that I'm sure that many of you want to ask, and being South African, being a man of color, how did I manage to get from the 15-year-old prisoner to the present day, where I'm now a conductor and also soloist director? I direct my own concerto performances. We are often told, I don't know whether you've heard this thing, that there's no racism in music. And usually the people that want you to agree with them are the ones that want to broadcast that opinion to the world because they are uncomfortable with the idea that actually music is just a part of our society, which of course does have racism within it. And so why would music be any different? Now, I don't want to kind of worry you about the egregious racism that I faced in Britain, but I have to tell you that for every day of my life as a professional artist in the United Kingdom and as just a citizen and a human being, I faced extraordinary racism. One would think that it wouldn't happen in the music business because one believes that artists who deal with something as esoteric as talking to God, you know, if one wants to put in those words, you know, when people play Bach, they often talk about, you know, they communicating with somebody in heaven. How is it possible they can be racist? That's the question. I've been on tour with colleagues sitting across the table after a concert having a drink, and one of them will say, you know, because we might disagree intellectually, they will tell me to go back where I came from. This kind of thing. Being stopped by the police more often than is just accidental. Look, because I freelanced a lot, I had to have a decent car as soon as I started. I mean, I started freelancing using the train, but after I'd been deserted on numerous railway stations, I felt the need to buy a car. And it had to be reliable. So my first car was a beautiful Rover 2600S. I don't know, most of you won't even know this particular car because Rover was a British car. It was quite stylish at the time, but that's what I drove first. Then I drove all sorts of things, a Jaguar, and now I drive a Porsche Panamera. But I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that throughout my professional life, I was stopped more times by the police than was accidental, and always on spurious grounds. Every time on tour, I mean, I can tell you so many incredible stories. In the United Kingdom, you know, let's say I go to the Albert Hall with my colleagues in the academy to play a rehearsal before our prom. When I come back after the coffee break, I will be the only person accosted at the door. Where are you going? Because how could I possibly be part of this orchestra called the Academy St. Martin in the Fields? You know? So there's these kind of things every day. And of course, success doesn't protect you from this either. So wherever you go, I mean, look, I live in a town with 11,000 people, 12,000 people. When I first came here, nobody knew me and they treated me like this outsider, the dark person who just didn't fit into their vision of the United Kingdom. But now, of course, they know me as a famous musician who flies around the world. They know me from the running club because I win medals. I won the silver medal for my age category in the Ridgeway 86-mile challenge. I ran from Ivinghoe Beacon to Avebury, 86 miles, and I came second in my category, which is extraordinary for a musician, don't you think? You know, but it's, so these little, and also I'm a member of the local trade association. I go to all the breakfast lunches. So in Tring, at least, I can walk around and I be a little safer than I might be in a big metropolis where I'm going to be attacked for the color of my skin. The number of times I've been spat at in the streets and told to bugger off to where I was born or this kind of thing. If I had to put a penny or 5 pence in a jar every time that was said to me, I'd be rich. So the thing is, what worries me about this is that my students are always very quiet about these questions, but eventually it arises. I have a brilliant double bass player as a student who's absolutely incredible. He's world class, but he has such a rough time at music college. You know, he passed very well his undergraduate degree, but didn't get a scholarship to the postgrad. Not because he wasn't any good, but just because there's nobody in the room to advocate for him when the discussion of money began to be discussed. And he'd also auditioned for rank and file jobs and never really got anywhere. And somebody sent him to me, and I realized that this person was potentially a world-class principal bass player and also soloist. And I offered to teach him, and we gave him a scholarship at Trinity, where I teach. And in October 2000 and whenever it was, lockdown has made things a little bit drifty. I can't really find which year it was, but he studied with me for a year. So let's say he started October. I told him in October that I thought that he was auditioning for the wrong jobs, that he should audition for principal jobs. And he laughed. He found it such a fanciful suggestion. We worked very hard, and in February he played in a masterclass where he played 2 movements from a concerto. And I've never heard this happen in a masterclass. He finished playing 2 movements, and the person giving the masterclass just said, "That's fantastic. I've got nothing to say. Bravo. Thank you very much." And at that point, I knew that this young man was going to be absolutely fine. Then he started auditioning for jobs, and he got, first trial was for number 3 in the Bournemouth Orchestra, then he got a trial for assistant principal in the BBC Welsh, and then he got another trial as principal, and suddenly he's being offered trials as a principal player when he was initially told he wasn't good enough to audition for rank and file. And the important thing about this is that, I mentioned this to you earlier, anything is possible. All you need is to believe that you can do it and to know how to put it all together, how to break it down, how to make it possible. And this young man, I know, is going to fly. I've not taught him now for some time, but every time he's in a little trouble or needs a bit of help, he calls me. All my students, they call me. Years after they've left, they need advice, they call me. So this is the other part of the responsibility that I have as an artist, that people need help. And I can help them because I've been along this route. It's important to know that music is the expression of human life in sound, and that it is not anathema. It shouldn't be the preserve of any particular part of society, and it's ours. Doesn't matter whether it's jazz, pop, classical, whatever. They're all branches of the same tree. And as human beings, we have a duty to ourselves to develop our potential completely and utterly. So I'm fortunate that at my age, as you know, I told you the mathematics at the beginning. If I was born in 1961, I'm going to be rather older than a lot of you in the room. But I now have the privilege of being on audition panels. And the other thing I've learned by being on audition panels for so long is I learned to identify potential, not just how people play. Because the truth of the matter is that people who come to audition for orchestras and for conservatoires and for scholarships and all sorts of beautiful things are usually people who've had a fantastic education. They've been to a specialist music school. They've had Saturday morning conservatoire. They had all sorts of things. And it's easy to say, oh, well, that so-and-so plays well. But how do you identify talent? And to give you an example of the kind of conservatoire that I teach in, and what I try to do is that I was sent an audition tape by a young Indian student who wanted to come to London to study. And the truth of the matter is that it was a pitiful audition. It was awful. He could hardly hold the bow or the bass. But I detected something in his attitude. And so I said, I'll teach him. And he came to London. This was 5 years ago. He came to London. And have you ever heard of somebody going to conservatoire and being taught how to hold an instrument, how to hold a bow from scratch, to play half position, 1 octave scales, the eventually 2 octaves? And you know,
according to study base, a 1 octave scale just means a scale in the range of 1 octave.
do you know,
C octaves.
we talk,
C major scale is C.
you know, we're told to be worried about the Chinese and the Russians hacking our technology, but that was Google. Listen to my conversation and then...
Yes.
Okay. So I better turn this off rather than just on silent. So, you know, apparently even on silent, Google interferes. But I can tell you that this young man who came from India 5 years ago left Trinity with a master's degree, having passed with an external examiner with a mark in excess of 90%, and he's just started his first job in the Symphony Orchestra of India. Is it possible, in anybody's estimation, to go from zero to a master's degree and a professional job in 5 years? That is great potential, and he realized his potential. All I had to do was to guide. And what made him a great student was that he knew what he had to learn. He listened intently. I teach by example. I will never expect anybody to do something that I can't do. Any student wants to learn a piece. If I don't know the piece, I will say, look, give me 3 weeks. I need to learn it. I will never teach something that I haven't performed myself or that I don't know. And if there's something that I feel they should hear how I play, I always have a bass in my hands when I teach. It's easy to pontificate from a chair. It's like pontificating about anything in life. One has to earn the right to pontificate. And I believe, and I don't say this in any arrogant manner, but I think I've earned the right to pontificate a little. I've been through the struggles, I've learned. My repertoire, for example, when I left music college in Manchester, I had maybe 4 recital programs. I won a competition, the Northwest Arts Young Chamber Musicians Platform. I got 35 recitals that year to play around the Northwest. And I thought knowing 4 recital programs, half a dozen concertos was a great start for a solo career. But I have to tell you that just in the last 10 years alone, I've learned what, 100 pieces additional. In 2000, which was the lockdown year, 2020, I recorded 27 new pieces that were written for me. So my life is always evolving. It's never done. And I know also that there are colleagues in the profession who have become drowned down by how our professional life works. And they sit in an orchestra, and the last time they played a recital was at music college, but they've been in the orchestra 30 years. And we should never allow this to happen to ourselves. Life is so exciting. There's so many challenges. Music is such a beautiful thing that we need to engage with it properly and always to be challenging ourselves. Every day, you have to be better than you were the day before. The question of racism in music also. How do we change it? How does anything change? We have to be the agents of change, and you don't do it by attacking the status quo. You change things by creating a new reality. And this is what is the responsibility of the generation at Music Conservatoire at the moment. You're the future. Without you, there's no music. Don't think about a career. Don't think about getting an agent. Don't think about how many costs. Don't think about success. Just think about life and music. You have to create something far more beautiful than just pursuing a living. It's not about a living. If you just do the best you ever can, the living comes by itself. You'll find a way. I mean, look, maybe I was in the start of that kind of process where you didn't have a job. In the 1980s, suddenly orchestras no longer gave people jobs. They were all freelance. You had to pay for your own pension fund. If you were sick, you didn't get paid. You only got paid when you played. But I hadn't been a single day without work until the pandemic. I worked every day of my life. Before the pandemic, I would have done 30 tours abroad in 1 year. I've been doing that for 20 years with the Academy and all sorts of other orchestras, and then I traveled on my own account, and suddenly nothing. But what does my life consist of at the moment? I'm a solo double bass player, I'm a conductor, I'm a recording artist, I play session music, I have a publishing company, I run an ensemble. In fact, I run 2 ensembles, and I teach, and every day of my life, somebody writes to me to ask me to write a reference for them. I've just had a request to write a reference for a young Korean bass player who wants to go and live in the United States. And she wants me to tell them that she's an exceptional artist worthy of immigration status, to go live in the United States. But it's an honor, it's an onerous task to look after everybody's interests, but it's a responsibility which I gladly shoulder. Because there were so many people in my life that gave me, that looked out for me and provided me with opportunities. The first of them were my parents, of course. And then the wonderful Zoltan Kovacs and Alan Stevenson, the people who taught me at university. And then at Manchester, and then Sir Charles Groves, then Nim Yarvi, all these great conductors. The Academy, Sir Neville Mariner. 20 years in that orchestra was probably the most beautiful chapter in my orchestral musical life. He trusted me. I loved the orchestra. The orchestra was not an orchestra, it was a dream. It was his vision of what music should be like. Now, on the question of color and racism, how can one ensure that everybody has access to these wonderful opportunities? I know that for me it was exceptional because I had all these wonderful people that made things possible. It's not that I didn't run into problems. It's just that I had the kind of personality which destroyed the problems in front of me. I just took no notice of if someone presented, I worked twice as hard to just demolish it. I know not everybody has that kind of character and resilience, but I've always been a fighter. But the truth of the matter is that I can help. But I know that you all have lots of questions, so I'm going to stop talking about the things that I've done. But I told you all that just to give you a view of what it's like to be able to navigate the musical world and to enjoy yourself. I have to say that my career is far from finished. I'm going to continue till I'm 100. But I want to enjoy every day. I run every day. I read every day. I practice every day. I buy new music every day. I commission music. Everything. Every day is busy. I get up at 6 in the morning and I don't go to bed till 1 o'clock the next morning. And I have a great time. So it's over to you. Any questions?
I just want to thank you so much for all of that, all of your knowledge and words, because I know some people from the Black Student Union at RCS are here, and me personally, as a Black musician, I don't actually get to talk to a lot of other Black musicians, and I know that some of the actors that are here also never really interacted with other Black musicians aside from me and maybe some few other people. So it's really great to hear someone who's really had a career in music talk about what it's like, and to hear you say that you're on audition panels, and like to know that there's someone there on the other side that's like willing to listen and to recognize potential, as you say, because there is, we talked about access, and I mean, I've been very lucky. I'm from Florida originally, and I'm here in Glasgow, and I'm trying to figure out how to stay here. David, please write me a reference letter for immigration. But it's one of those things of like, I've things lined up for me to get here. And that doesn't happen for everyone, like you said. And it's a shame because there are so many people who could be amazing musicians and make such amazing contributions, but just don't have the access to it, or not, I wouldn't say not the resilience, but the sort of, you get really beaten down, I think, by life. And I liked how you mentioned the importance of the psychology of just playing. And in the last few years, I've worked on like getting over this, as you know, Donald Trump was elected in the States and everything started to go a bit topsy-turvy, and you realizing just how racist this industry can be. I've had to deal with my own sort of self-sabotaging myself because I was worried about, oh, what, I don't want to deal with the racism, so I'm just going to avoid it by not doing anything. So I guess I want to ask you if you have any advice on getting over that fear of just the racism you'd face.
Look, the first thing that one has to realize is that this kind of injustice is not accidental. It is a part of the system. And until the system changes, nothing fundamental will change. It will remain roughly the same. And look, every now and again, there's a catastrophic event like the murder of George Floyd. And for a short while, everybody's horrified and it temporarily shakes things up. But then it all goes back to sleep again and we return to normal. And I know that's a very awkward thing to say at this time, especially since we just had the trial of the officer who murdered George Floyd. But in the United Kingdom, there's also been resistance to racism. And we always refer to them as race riots, which they're not, they're resistance. We try to demean struggles of ordinary people. And these things recur. Every decade or every few years, there's another struggle. In South Africa, where I was born, the struggle was never won, it was subverted. And to add to your reading lists, if you look up John Pilger, he wrote a book called Freedom Next Time. And he outlines in that book the nature of the deal which brought apartheid to an end and how it was a complete fraud and that actually the people are still enslaved. So add that to the reading list. The other thing you should add to the reading list is Buckminster Fuller. I gave you the quote earlier about how to change an existing paradigm by creating a new one. You don't challenge the old, you create a new one. The other thing which is important in this debate about the question of how we approach existing in a society which often rejects you. I mean, as an artist, you talk the questions of color. Look, it's true. Racism exists. And we cannot pretend that it doesn't exist. I told you at the very beginning, there are those colleagues who suggest that racism doesn't exist. And if I said that, they would just love me to death, and they would then broadcast the fact that I said there's no racism. And of course, that would be disingenuous. It'd be a lie. So we have to accept that this is how it is. We also have to understand the origins of the problem and to realize that it is up to us not just to deal with racism in music, but in our society. And this is what I tried to do as a 15-year-old kid, to overthrow racism in South Africa. But then I realized that actually it didn't just exist in South Africa. It's a worldwide problem because the economic system that engulfs the world is a global system, and that South Africa was just a small part of this kind of thing. So as artists, you have to feel part of human society, first of all, not just the artist in isolation, because if you operate like that, nothing meaningful can come of that. Also, the question of the confidence as a human being. You have as much right to be on this planet as everybody else. And you have to find the people that will help you flourish. As I said earlier, the great students are those who know what they need to learn, who to go to find that out, and how to implement what they've been told. Psychology is very important. We are all indoctrinated from birth. The first 7 years in particular. You can look this up again. There's something called The Pathology of the Rich. And Chris Hedges wrote a book and did videos about this. He's an American Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. But he asked the question, why do the rich always end up rich, however stupid they are? And the poor always remain poor, however hard they work. It's because the patterns of behavior of the rich have been implanted into the rich, and that then perpetuates this virtuous cycle of great riches. Whereas the poor, because they've grown up in a poor neighborhood and with the pathology of the poor, will always self-sabotage. You use the word sabotage, self-sabotage. And I know this is a fact. We all know this is a fact. But the beautiful thing about this is that epigenetics, the man who discovered epigenetics was Dr. Bruce Lipton, realized that genes are not the end of the story, that genes are expressed as a function of the medium in which they exist. And he also realized that you can get into the unconscious to unprogram the program of the first 7 years, the program of poverty, whichever the program is that's going to sabotage you for life. The other important thing that I find with my students, they know that when I prepare them for a competition or for a scholarship audition or audition for a job, they don't have to worry about whether they're going to win. They know they're going to win because it's inevitable. You prepare in a way which means you're going to do it. When I was a youngster, I had no money. And if I didn't win competitions and scholarship auditions, I would starve. And I learned how to play to win. Not that that's a glorious thing to pursue, you understand, in isolation, but you have to know what it is that touches the particular buttons which will open the purse strings. Also, as young musicians, you have to know how to exist in the medium in which you swim. If it's a toxic medium, you have to know how long you can go without breathing in a toxic medium and what you need to do to breathe better. In my own case, what I found was very useful for me was that I needed to leave the country very regularly, the United Kingdom. And fortunately, I didn't have to do much about it because the Academy toured a lot. So I'd be out of the country 30 times a year. I'd be amongst people who spoke a different language, ate different food, thought differently, read different newspapers, saw different weather forecasts, and I came home reinvigorated. Lockdown has been a bit difficult because, we're in the same place all the time.
A bit stuck.
Yeah. So the truth of the matter is that to add to the reading list, I didn't mention James Martin. James Martin was a rocket scientist, but he wrote a book called The Meaning of the 21st Century. What does it mean to be a part of the 21st century? What are the responsibilities? How does the future look? And this is kind of a clarion call to action. It's about everything. It's not just about being a musician. It's about sensitivity to the environment, to know that the earth we live on is part of just one little system called Gaia. And if we destroy one part of it, it just infects all the rest and it's a disaster. Racism infects the whole society and it's a disaster. So we have to deal with it as part of the problem of the whole society in which we exist. Musically, there's a lot we can do. I mean, we can talk details, but in terms of general concept, you have to understand also that the problem in the arts is part of the problem of larger society. There are many details. I mean, I talked about being on audition panels. I talked about, my responsibility as a board member of various organizations. As you probably know, I'm on the board of trustees of the Royal Philharmonic Society, and I've been on the board of the Academy and all sorts of things. But I think, for example, the Royal Philharmonic Society, they commissioned Beethoven to write the Choral Symphony, which became one of the great masterpieces of the world. And I wonder, do I and my fellow trustees have the vision to find the next Beethoven to commission that piece which will last for a few hundred years once it's written? And that's what we have to aspire to, that level of understanding and wisdom. And if you think in that way, you can defeat any obstacles.
Yeah, thank you. That's I have so many questions off of that, and I'll try to pick one or two. I want to say that your mention of epigenetics, I have a particular interest in trauma research, so I love looking at all of these things. And there's a few books that I will recommend called the Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and also My Grandmother's Hands, which talk about how these sorts of ideas and feelings are passed on through history and through our ancestors, and that it's something that can be sort of healed. We can heal these things, but I think we need to acknowledge them first. And the system, as we've been talking about, doesn't really want to acknowledge these pains, and that's how they keep us from succeeding.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with you. Trauma is transmitted through generations. It doesn't just evaporate, There's so much to psychology. You probably know the theory of the collective unconscious, all these particular theories, and when was it that we first began to contemplate our existence as spiritual beings? Sigmund Freud was in the vanguard of this movement, and his house is down the road from me, where he lived when he came to live as a refugee. And his nephew, of course, was Bernays, who perfected the techniques of propaganda. He worked for Woodrow Wilson, and he wrote the Handbook of Propaganda, which is still being used today by governments around the world, including our very own government here in the United Kingdom. They use these dark techniques to affect us, not individually, but by the million. How is it that we begin to believe that black is white and white is black? So we have to be careful with these things. But there's some incredible discoveries, as you will know, Simone, in this area of trauma. EMDR, for example, was an accidental discovery. Francine Shapiro, walking in the woods, worrying about some troubling things, and because of how the light fell in the woods, her eyes darted side to side, and suddenly she realized when she got home, she'd reprocessed this thing which was so traumatic. And then she realized that you get into the unconscious with the side-to-side motion of the eyes. So, of course, this became a technique which was first rejected by everybody, but then they discovered that actually it was the only thing that worked for soldiers who suffered post-traumatic stress. And I have to tell you that I'm a perfect example of the miracle of EMDR. I've been a prisoner, I've been tortured, I've been, within an inch of my life, and it haunted me. And I never had treatment. And then when I eventually got treatment from the wrong side, sort of psychology, it didn't work. It's like a sticking plaster over the wound. But then EMDR came along, and I was treated using EMDR. Miracle, it changed my life, and also changed circumstance for everybody close to me. My wife, my children, I became a different person because the trauma no longer had this deleterious effect. So I think, it's important to be able to identify the things which are a hindrance in the journey of every human being. I mean, wouldn't it be nice for everybody to have an unencumbered journey through life? But, before we move on to another question, I just wanted, for the artists in the room, and we're all artists, whatever you do, if you pursue it in a particular way, you're an artist. Now, the first thing to say is that there's a book called Infinite and Finite Games by James Carse, C-A-R-S-E. And this puts in perspective what we do. If you're going to see everything in life as a competition, it's the route to disaster. Because in a competition, there's one winner and everybody else is worthless. And this is not true, of course. The infinite game operates on a completely different basis. It suggests that we as individuals enter something that's already been in motion for a long time. There's a history, there's a wisdom, there are all sorts of things we inherit when we come to the journey. And we look at journey. But by the time we exit the journey, we have to have left something of value. And I would like to encourage everyone to read that, because it's not a long read, but it will change your mind forever about the manner in which we should all approach what we do as artists. It's a journey, and we just make our contribution.
Yeah.
Next question.
I'll definitely check out those books. If anyone wants to pop questions in the chat, feel free. I have another question before people start typing anything or as you think. So you mentioned EMDR. I love EMDR. It's also very much changed my life, and also researching somatic experiencing and how there's the book, The Body Keeps the Score, which talks about how we hold trauma within our bodies. And for me, I have found that playing music is my one way of reconnecting to myself. And I'm wonder what your relationship to the bass is, and if you've had any sort of connection that way.
Okay. To talk about the bass, first of all, the bass for me was a lifelong passion. I mean, from the day I started playing at the age of 16. How many years is that? Till 60. It's a lot. I've played the bass every day of my life since then. It was, first of all, a means of resistance, because in South Africa, you weren't allowed to speak up for yourself if you were the wrong color. You just had to take things as they were. But it was the way through which I said things which would be unsayable. If I played a competition I won it, that spoke loudly. If I played in performance club, whatever I did, the instrument spoke for me. But it also was the underdog instrument, so it was a kind of political statement in many ways also, a complex political statement. But it also became the means through which I expressed myself. It allowed me self-expression and also personal fulfillment. My first solo CD recording was the program of 10 Bottesini pieces that I played in South Africa to graduate. And that for me was a turning point. I became a recording artist, and I thought, I learned a lot from recording my first ever CD, solo CD. I've done 15 of them now. Now I know that I can walk to any studio and record a disc. I'll get out of there relatively unscathed because I know how to prepare it. And on this question of me, the artist, I want to point in the direction of a quotation by Francis of Assisi, which I discovered, I forget how old I was, but it has remained with me because of its power. It says, somebody who works with their hands is a laborer. Somebody who works with their hands and the brain, craftsman. But somebody that works with the hands, the brain, and the heart is an artist. And that every day I think about. Because to me, music is a way of life. It's not a fashion accessory. And I'm afraid to say that classical music has become, in some quarters, a bit of a fashion accessory. And we have to be careful, because it means much more than that. To me, it means so much more. But I don't only find expression through music. There are two other things that can do the same for me, to take me to this place in the unconscious where you forget about mundane, earthly considerations. I am an ultramarathon runner, and this is, again, purely by accident. Just as I turned 50, I realized I was maybe a bit out of shape, having spent too much time in five-star hotels and, and airport lounges. And I decided to run around the block where I live, which is 1 kilometer around the block. And actually it was exhausting, and I felt terrible. And I thought, this is disgraceful. So I ran it again the next day, and the day after, and the day after that, and it slowly got better. Then I ran 1.3 kilometers. Then I ran 5. Then I ran 10. Then I ran a half marathon. Then I ran a marathon. Then I ran 56 kilometers, my first ultramarathon. Then I did 89 kilometers. Then I did 86 miles, which is about 140 something kilometers. But I soon discovered that when I ran long distance, it was on my feet, processing time. I'd already been through the pain barrier in my training to get to be strong enough to run 86 miles. But it allowed me again to enter this spiritual realm where you forgot about earthly things, and actually life became incredibly beautiful. You saw it the way it really was rather than the way you told it is. So running, reading, and music are the three things for me that can allow me to access the beautiful thing about being truly human. You know that we're electricity, so everybody has their aura. When they measure your brain waves with an encephalograph, It's electricity, all this, firing between the synapses. The heart is electricity. That's why they have cardiograms. They measure the electrical impulses. And we have to realize that we're energy. Often you will be in the presence of somebody where the energy is not in harmony. And that's the kind of person you steer clear. Oh my God, we can't get on. It's because there's no harmony in the electricity. So, our instincts tell us certain things. So this is kind of my life: reading, music, running, and just being creative. Every day I do something which is creative, which has consequences, also which requires me to work hard. I've never been afraid of hard work, because often opportunity comes dressed up like very hard work. And the harder the work it turns up as, the greater the rewards in the end. So this is the other thing that you always have to realize. To recognize opportunity. It comes dressed up in many guises. But also you always have to go and look out for it, otherwise we miss it. I think of all the great opportunities I might have missed in the past as a youngster because I was terrified. What have you got to lose? Nothing. Let's say yes to opportunities when they come. I could carry on talking forever about the things that we all experience in common as human beings, and also the things that sometimes hinder us in this journey. But suffice to say, we all need to know when we need help, where we can go for help, and what it is that we need to do to be able to smooth the path. It's like with the Malinization thing. When you do something incredibly difficult or demanding or crazy the first time, it's like going through the dense undergrowth. There's no path. But the more you travel that path, the smoother it becomes until it's a superhighway. And this is life itself. Make your own life superhighways of success.
Yes. Great response. There's one comment I want to make before I go. We have a couple questions. Have you ever read the book Sensuous Knowledge by Mina Salami?
I haven't, and I'm going to make a note of it.
Because in the first chapter, she talks about knowledge and this thing of emotional knowledge and rational knowledge, and how governments will use rational knowledge to get rid of emotional knowledge because it's easier to control people through the use of rational knowledge and fear. And emotional knowledge, which is the arts and feeling within our bodies and all these things, it's incredibly important, and you need both to really live a full life.
I agree. I mean, we're whole human beings. They use fear. If we allow them to use fear, they will use all, and they do use it all the time. We should be afraid of immigrants, afraid of this, afraid of that, afraid of and they win every time because we're not prepared for them. We have to be prepared.
Yes. So we have one question here from Daniela. What responsibility, if any, do teachers or lecturers of music, particularly if they are white and in positions of power, have in decolonizing education, i.e. making it more accessible and inclusive?
I mean, it's an enormous question, that, but just there's so many things tied in there. It's going to be impossible to answer it in a very pithy or very shorthand way. But suffice to say, as I told you earlier, anybody who's in a position of responsibility teaching young people, that's an enormous thing. And every word you say, every piece of advice you give, anything you do has repercussions. Take the question of repertoire alone. I know from my own straw polls traveling the world that the same 15 pieces nowadays are played by the whole world's orchestras, but just on different nights of the week. And what that suggests to me is a total lack of imagination. There are thousands of composers, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of literary history. How is it that we end up with just Beethoven 5, Mozart Clarinet Concerto, the Four Seasons, the same old pieces? It's because we don't examine things. Look, and I'm just as guilty as everybody. I'm coaching a string quintet at Trinity at the moment. And they started off with, I started them in a piece that I only discovered a couple of years ago. It's by Adolphe Blanc, B-L-A-N-C. It's a quintet which is so extraordinarily good. I wondered, how did I never know it before? And now they're playing Bottesini quintet because this year is the bicentenary of Bottesini's birth. Bottesini was a great composer, not just a bass player, and most people don't even know that. But then I was researching because I wanted them to play something slightly more challenging technically and also in terms of harmony. Then I discovered a string quintet with bass by Mio, and I had no idea this piece exists. How could I not know after 40 years 40-something years of playing the bass that this piece didn't exist. And this is what I mean about the responsibility of people who teach in music. It's about being sensitive to absolutely everything about the human being, because we have responsibility for the future of every person that we touch. Everybody who walks through the door of a conservatoire is going to be a part of human society in the end. We hope. And we also hope that by the time we have finished the process of education with them, they will be functional, challenging, and productive members of this human society. We have to make sure they read as widely as possible, that they have a philosophy for life, not just the philosophy, I got to earn a living. That's not good enough. If that's your ambition, forget it. You may as well just go and pour petrol or whatever, because that was not a great one. We have to do meaningful work. Every word one says resonates. In terms of repertoire, look, I run an ensemble called the Ubuntu Ensemble. It's the Ubuntu concept is an African concept. And it means basically that we are who we are because of our connection to others. We are not individuals, we are part of human society. This country is full of South African musicians of great distinction. So the Ubuntu Ensemble has the leader of the London Philharmonic, Peter Schoeman, at the head of it. It has Rudy de Groot, whom you probably know from Glasgow, who's principal in the BBC Scottish, or probably is back again. But there are all these great musicians, South Africans, in London and in the United Kingdom. And I put them together into an ensemble. And we commission South African composers of all complexions to write music for us. And this is our mission for the Ubuntu Ensemble. With my own ensemble, in Music Hunting, I surround myself with musicians with whom I share a philosophy, musically and intellectually. I commission music, I do things, I pay for projects to do stuff because we believe in it. So decolonizing, in a way, look, those people who tell you that this process is about denying history are telling you an untruth. It is trying to make sure that the whole of human history is told, and that we don't just tell history from the school of falsification. Because the truth of the matter is, conventional history, as we are taught it, is a bit like the map of the world, which shows Europe this size and Africa like a little pinprick on the map. And we do the same with music, we do the same with political history, with economic history. Apparently, there's only one form of economics which is acceptable. That's classical economic theory. And of course, we know that human societies existed for thousands of years without this little thing that has hamstrung us over the last 200. So we have to look a little broader. So I like to encourage all my fellow musicians who teach in conservatories and universities and just encounter human beings every day of their life. For me, every human interaction is an opportunity to learn and to teach. And we have to do that with respect and understanding. So every day I have to make sure that the facts at my disposal are no longer irrelevant or incorrect. I have to be sure that whatever I tell anybody is intellectually correct. Look, we have a habit in this country, when somebody doesn't like your argument, you say it's 10, they say, no, it's not 10, it's 9.75 actually. And to have that sort of pointed discussion, so we have to make sure that what we say is intellectually consistent, musically consistent. I mean, look, as artists, look, we had 7:05, but I'll just say this one little thing. As artists, we have to justify what we do. We can't just say, I do it because I like it. There has to be a framework within which you play Mozart and Haydn. Why is Mozart got to sound different from Haydn? And why is does that have to sound different from Beethoven or Brahms or time style? If you cut a slice through society at any time, everything is related. Architecture, literature, poetry, everything. And we have to be able to see that in the music that we do. So we have a big and enormous responsibility, not just as individuals that are being taught or hoping to pursue that, but also those of us who teach. Teaching is, in my opinion, one of the grandest responsibilities in human society, next to being a parent, of course.
Yes. So we're a bit over time. We still had one more question, but I want to say thank you so much. And also to address the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland and the people who hopefully the staff members that will be watching this, that everything Leon just said about having knowledge and knowing having your own opinions and enjoying life and still wanting to learn and not being complacent is so important. And I'm still young, I've not lived a lot of life yet, but I do see complacency in some staff members, especially as the Black Student Union has been building the Anti-Racism Action Plan, and asking people to maybe explore and learn new things. That I know it can be scary, but there's a lot of beautiful repertoire out there by people we don't know about, and we don't need to keep playing the same 15 pieces. We can program new works. We can ask ensembles to do new things, and music can be so much fun and so enjoyable for everyone, students and staff included. So thank you so much for saying that, Leon, and thank you so much for the wonderful conversation.
My pleasure. Look, anybody who wants to write to me personally to ask any more questions, anybody wants to call me, I'm available, always. It's never the wrong time to write or to call. Feel free to be in touch if there's anything else you want to know. And thank all of you for coming along to listen to me talk about my passion in life, music, politics, reading, running. Simone, thank you very much for being a wonderful host.
Thank you. And I'll probably definitely send you an email.